welcome everybody to this joint meeting of the Edinburgh Redevelopment Commission, Edinburgh Redevelopment Authority, Edinburgh Town Council, Edinburgh School Board, and Edinburgh Library Board joint meeting for a TIF workshop presented by Heidi Amsel, Baker Tilly. To start with, to see if we got a quorum for each board, I'm going to again do roll call for the Redevelopment Commission. Matt Urban. Here. Karen Fitzpatrick. Here. Sarah Beth Garber. Here. Amy Urban. Debbie Vaughn. Here. Kathy Ham. Here. So we do have a quorum of the commission. Authority. Scott Finley. Here. Dawn Graham. Rob Teagan. Town Council Ryan Kirschville. Miriam Rose. Debbie Buck. Sherry Sweet. Here. Mike Bryant. Okay. School board members Daniel Teeter. Here. Kathy Ham. Here. Dave Bauman. Here. Ryan Blaker. Here. Carol Swanson. Okay, so we have a quorum of the school board members as well. Library members Amy Stinson. William Jones. Brittany Tracy. Karen Fitzpatrick. Here. Christy Riley. Donna Bryant. Right, we do not, so the only boards that we have before are the school and the redevelopment commission, and
Like open a meeting for each one of those.
For those two, I would open it up.
okay, so we will open this as a public meeting for the school board.
Or that matters.
Go for that. I'll set that.
Alright. Like to call the order to, we have Edinburgh Redevelopment Commission meeting for Wednesday, May 20th, Town Council headquarters at 12 p.m. My roll call yet? Alright, roll call my members, myself, Matt Urban, Karen Fitzpatrick. Sarah Beth Brever.
Here.
Amy Urban, not present. Debbie Vaughn. And Kathy Ham. Thank you. So we'll officially call the order meeting for the Edinburgh School Board of Trustees. Say last line. David Leader here. Kathleen.
Here.
David Bauman here. Ryan Blaker here.
Awesome. Well, I'll get started. Heidi Amsel with Baker Tilly. I head up our tax and finance service line. So I'm here just to talk TIF 101 with you guys. Want this to be conversational since it is a small group. If you are here to learn anything about data centers, I'm not talking about data centers, so I'm just going to throw that out there at the beginning of the meeting. And so if you are here for that, you feel free to go. You don't want to. But here just to talk about TIF, all things TIF. Again, if you have any questions or as we go through this, definitely ask these as you go. So thank you for having me. So economic development and TIF go hand in hand with each other, as you guys can both imagine. Why do you offer incentives such as TIF to do economic development projects throughout the state? And I should say 49 of the 50 states have TIF that's being utilized in different forms of fashion, all relatively similar across the board. But to encourage new business development, job creation, definitely job retention, it can be used for as well. And to really target market segments. So, what are you guys known for here, or what do you want to be known for here, and making sure that you're getting those type of industries in your community, so they have the jobs for the folks to enjoy. And then just competition among alternative sites is also one of the items, which just means, there are companies all over the state and multiple states looking at different sites and comparing the sites and where they should locate. Sometimes you're on that list and sometimes you're not, but you do want to remain competitive. And generally, if companies know that you are open to the concept of TIF and utilizing tax and finance, then you check one of the boxes as far as being a site that they would consider. just a couple of high level items as far as why you incentivize economic development projects. So TIF is one of the main tools in the state of Indiana to incentivize economic development projects, redevelopment projects as well. So you can use it to finance the incentive. So again, if you're trying to lure a company here and there's a financial gap and they just can't make the project work, you can help and fill some of that gap using TIF revenues. That's the incentive side of things. You can also use TIF to fund infrastructure projects that would have to otherwise be funded with other sources of revenue. And so if you had a TIF area that was generating some revenue, you could use sidewalk improvements, roads, sewer, water, street lights, signage, trails, parks. Really, it's wide open as far as how you can utilize those TIF monies. And so that's really the main purpose for it. Another purpose that I like to always talk about is that it encourages orderly growth. You should know in your community where you want certain types of development. Where do you want the industry? Where do you want the homes? You obviously have a beautiful downtown. How do you keep it beautiful? How do you keep it maintained? Looking good at wanting businesses to stay there. All of those things are targeted areas, and TIF really makes you do that. It makes you kind of focus in where you want those different types of developments in your community. It also can be used to redevelop blighted areas. So if you have buildings that maybe are falling apart or haven't been maintained over the years, TIF is often a tool that is used in local governments to help do something with the building, whether or not it be to demolish the building or incentivize a developer to come in and renovate the building. Both options are help use to better light. So I always like to talk kind of property tax basics 101. All of you guys in this room probably know it better than anyone outside of this room. But essentially, when you have property taxes, you have your gross assessed value on each property, which is the land and the building value, less your exemptions or your deductions. So your business, you have a tax abatement, that's a deduction. Your home, you have homestead credit, that's a deduction. Those are removed from your gross assessed value to get you to the net assessed value. Your net assessed value is the assessed value that you are taxed on. So you take that assessed value divided by 100 times the tax rate, that gets you your property tax levy. The levy, as you guys know, are the budgets that each one of you have to work with each year. That levy or that budget can only grow by what the state is telling you that you can grow that by, which is the maximum levy growth quotient. For 2026, it was 4.1%. The legislature the past couple of years talked about capping it. They are not capping it for 2027. We're estimating it to be 5.6% for 2027. And so, again, always something that's discussed every legislative session, but that is essentially what you can grow your budget by each year. As you guys know, more than likely in your community, 5.6% growth of your budget probably doesn't cover just the cost of living changes, of construction, of insurance policies, and everything that you need to be able to run your school or your city, whatever. And so, with that, you do have to get creative about what other tools are out there that you can utilize when you do have maximum levy growth quotients, when you have property tax caps, when you have new legislation coming down the pike that's going to affect that equation. Then communities do have to get savvy about what other tools there are available to use. And so, one other comment with this is that if assessed, the way the system currently works in Indiana is it's a levy-driven system is what it's called, meaning that if your AVs, your assessed values are going up in your community, your tax rates are more than likely coming down to get you to that levy. Vice versa, if your AVs are going down or depreciating over time, your tax rate has to go up to get you to that same levy. And so with that, and TIF comes the discussion. So essentially the TIF that we're going to get into in this equation is important to start to connect the dots with, because TIF is essentially an increase in assessed value. So again, if AVs are going up, say you did not TIF it, maybe went up, tax rate would come down, you're gonna get your same levy that grows by your maximum levy growth portion each year. So if you tip it and your AB is not going up, it's staying right where it's at, you're gonna continue to get your levy or whatever it is, whatever your levy is based on the ABs and the tax rates. And so that, again, it's just something that I like to start the conversation with, to start to connect the dots between property tax collections and TIF. One other thing you'll hear me talk about often is overlapping taxing units. That's why you're all in here today, because you are overlapping taxing units. And so that's within a TIF area or a town, whatever. The county, the township, the town, school, library, and any special taxing districts make up the total tax rate that you all pay as taxpayers in the town. And so you can see here, this is just the town of Edinburgh 2 taxing district, that if you live in that taxing district, then you're paying a portion of the county tax rate, the township, the town's rate, the library, school corporation, and the solid waste management district. And so the total tax rate that you would see on the tax bill is the $3.98 change. So knowing who the overlapping taxing units are important in the discussion of TIF, just so you know like who is impacted or not is not impacted, and that you all each individually play a role in your portion of the tax rate. So the town folks can only affect the town of Edinburgh town line item. The school folks would only affect the school line item, library, so on and so forth. You guys can only control your portion of this total tax rate. And so it is a bigger equation as far as what people see on their actual tax bills, because it is that total tax rate which makes up each one of the individual components. So it is important to know and understand what each one of you guys are doing. That's going to ultimately affect this rate. So to get into high level of TIF, this map represents 3 different boundaries. One is in the black outline, which is the redevelopment district. So in Indiana, redevelopment commissions are the one that establish and manage the TIF area. So the ones that create the TIF areas. And the redevelopment commission as a body of government has control over the redevelopment district. So Edinburgh's redevelopment commission has the same boundaries as the town of Edinburgh, same corporate boundaries. The redevelopment commission can actually issue bonds payable from a property tax or with a property tax backup if they need to, because it's the redevelopment district that they have control over. And so like the town, they have their own debt limits, just like the town does. And so they do have control over the redevelopment district. Within the redevelopment district, if you decide to create a TIF area, you create 2 legal boundaries. One is the EDA, the Economic Development Area, and one is the Allocation Area boundaries. The EDA, which is represented in the red boundary here, is where you can spend the TIF dollars, where money can be spent. The Allocation Area, which is represented in yellow here, is where you capture the TIF. So say, all hypotheticals, obviously, here today. If there was an industry that was coming in, maybe on the town boundaries over here, but you knew that your goal was to improve your downtown, and your downtown was not in a TIF area. Well, the industry could be the allocation area, because it's new, it's coming up out of the ground, it's going to generate TIF dollars, because it's generating incremental assessed value. But then the EDA boundaries could encompass your downtown, so that you could use the TIF money generated here in your downtown, or wherever it might be. Maybe it's in a park area or wherever it might be. So your allocation area, where you're collecting the TIF, and your EDA boundaries do not have to be the same. And you can have multiple allocation areas in one EDA if you wanted to. So the EDA should pick up the areas in your community that you want to develop. So, any questions with that concept?
Yeah, just going back to page 3 or slide 3, you have your overlapping tax units. Is it normal? Do you budget that? So you know, you've got three taxing, or several taxing districts going in that. That's, I mean, it's one big lump sum of money, but there's no budget, and so much always set aside a percentage for one taxing unit, such as the library or the school and the town.
So like, yeah, that's a good question. So like the town of Edinburgh, they have their own budget, yes. And their budget can grow by the maximum levy of portion. So for next year, it can grow by 5.6%. And then the school has its own, and then the library has its own.
Yes, but what about in the TIF dollars?
So the TIF area, let me go to this slide. So when you create a TIF area, say it's this boundary of land, so it's this parcel of land that you want to create a TIF area. Whatever the net assessed value is of that parcel when it's the TIF is created stays in the tax base of all of those overlapping tax units. And then the incremental assessed value, which is in the teal here, is that assessed value times the tax rate divided by 100 goes to the redevelopment commission to spend in the allocation fund to be spent in serving or benefiting the TIF area. And so those money, that incremental assessed value is if it is in a TIF area, the taxes generated from it go into an allocation fund that is directed by the redevelopment commission to spend on projects.
So it's basically one big pot of money.
Yes.
It's not have to be.
It is separate and aside from the town's budget, and it actually doesn't actually have to be budgeted like the other town funds, but yes. So if the county had a TIF area, it would be the same thing, the town had a TIF area, it would be the same thing. So like for the current TIF areas that the town has, there's an allocation fund for the collecting those monies. Yeah. So to stay on this chart, so the building happens, the incremental assessed value is generated from that new business that's coming in, that's represented in the teal. When you create, we're going to talk about commercial TIF areas and residential housing TIF areas both today. As of July 1st of this year, they both have a 25-year life. And that 25-year life does not start until long-term obligations are entered into. And so if you were to create a TIF area today, it would have a 25-year life that would not start until an obligation was entered into. At the point in time that the TIF area matures, then that is the red section, or the blue section up here. All of that assessed value that's captured within the TIF area gets released to the overlapping tax units, tax bases. The goal of the TIF area is to get businesses there, to get the assessed value in your community, and then it gets released. And that is the goal of the TIF area. I would say, as far as like the TIF area starting with an obligation incurred, pretty much all, I would say, majority of our TIF areas in the state of Indiana have obligations that have been incurred in most of them if they have been outstanding for a while. So a lot of the TIF areas in the state of Indiana do have maturity dates, and those that assessed value will roll off. So right now, I'm working with several of my communities, like Plainfield, for example. All of that industrial park area around the airport has been in a TIF area since 1998. And so a lot of those TIF areas are starting to end. Well, that's like hundreds of millions of dollars of assessed value that's going to be rolling on the tax bases of all of those overlapping tax units. So that's where redevelopment commissions, if they're successful, and overlapping tax units have to work together so that you know, as a school corporation, when is that assessed value going to be coming onto the tax base of the school, so they can financially plan the strategy to maintain the tax rate. Let's skip one. So this slide, I'm going back to slide 8. So traditional TIF or commercial TIF, as we refer to it, is the TIF that's been around for a long time. It is the TIF that you can capture any commercial structure, any apartment structure, any non-residential, like single-family home type structure, you can capture, and that's the commercial TIF area. In 2018, the legislation put into place residential housing TIF that allows you to capture single-family homes. And we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail and explain some strategies, what it is, how you can use the TIF. But commercial and residential housing TIF can talk about a lot. So this slide, I just pretty much explained. The chart at the bottom basically shows you that base assessed value. That is the assessed value when a TIF is created. That remains with the overlapping taxing units tax basis. So the total net assessed value of each one of those units, that stays. And then anything that happens above that base assessed value, that is times the tax rate divided by 100, goes into an allocation fund to be used by the development commission. How can that TIF be used? So once you have a successful TIF, meaning there's some revenue starting to come in the door, and they do take a little while to start getting built out and generating enough revenue to do something with, unless you had a huge industry that's land in one day. So the first box on the top left says that to be able to use TIF on a project, the projects have to be in or directly serving or benefiting the TIF area. So the projects have to be within the TIF area. But if the projects do, then it can be used for any capital project expenditures, any public infrastructure. So again, the roads, the water, the sewer, the stormwaters, the sidewalks, type projects. It can be used for site acquisition, clearing, if you need to do environmental testing on a site. TIF revenues can be used to pay for that. Any public safety projects. So in really small communities, oftentimes there's a strapped for cash to pay for a new fire truck, for example, or whatever it might be, police car. TIF in certain cases have been used to pay for those projects because it's public safety and it's serving a particular area. Recreation facilities, so your trails, your playground equipment, all can be paid for with TIF. Job training programs can be paid for with TIF. Efficiency projects. Starting a few years ago, police and fire capital and operating can be used or be paid for with TIF. I personally raise a red flag. I would say that operational expenses do not end and TIF areas end. And so if you are relying on TIF revenue to pay operational expenses, you can only rely on it for a certain period of time because it will go away. So you have to get more creative. What are one-time things that you can use TIF to pay for if you have fire or police and fire needs? What are one-time things you can pay for with the TIF, but not operational expenses is my guidance. New coming out of this 2026 legislative session was the bottom box, which is construction or expansion of childcare facilities and also ongoing operation of childcare facilities. Again, on the operation side of things, you have to be very careful. In my opinion, I think there are some ways you can be strategic about using TIF if childcare is a true need in your community, but you can actually help construct childcare facilities now. And I would say in the past, there has been childcare related projects that have been granted some TIF funds, but this is a little bit less is that can be used for that. So really housing and childcare in the past 5 years has really become an issue. All of the industry, a lot of industries are here now, and so all of the jobs are here now. It's now like, okay, well, we need to house these people somewhere. We look within our communities and oh shoot, they have kids. We need to take care of their kids too. So it all is kind of coming out like that way. Any questions here? In the downtown area, if you have a downtown TIF area, just some additional uses that I like to point out. Again, any of that public infrastructure, if you need to acquire property, if you need to do utility relocation, so if you have up above the ground wires and you need to put them below ground, you can use TIF for that. Parking is always a big discussion, especially in more urban communities. Parking garage structures are often used and paid for with TIF. Facade improvement programs, which we'll talk about that a little bit more. Any building rehabilitation or infill, and co-working space are just a couple more concepts in the downtown too.
That's what we have. I think we already have a downtown TIF established. that's why I was like, and there's a little bit of money already from the years ago.
Been there for 8 years, but I don't think downtown has much.
That was a question I was gonna ask. Can the downtown, can the TIF money be spent on any TIF district, or can you only spend downtown TIF or downtown TIF?
So it depends on how the EDA boundaries were set when you created the TIF areas. Oftentimes, I would say in the past, when TIF areas have created new EDAs and new allocation areas have been coterminous and the same boundaries when they're set up. You can consolidate the EDA boundaries amongst your TIF areas so that you can use the TIF interchangeably, and you can expand the EDA boundary. Maybe there's an area of town that you hadn't thought of but is now an focus. You can make the EDA boundary inclusive of that. The EDA boundary does nothing besides allow you a legal boundary you can spend the TIF monies. It's not, there's no collection of revenues or anything, it's just a boundary. So I think in your individual areas, had EDA boundaries created for each one of them.
I don't recall what it would all be in the ordinance that established. I think part of the confusion there is this in like overall confusion. Because I don't think there's technically a legal term for TIF district. It's an economic development area and allocation. So the TIF district doesn't actually, that's what it's called.
Yeah, normally people refer to TIF district as the allocation area because they don't know that there's two legal boundaries that were established when you create them. And that's where, again, more and more communities these days are getting more strategic about how to utilize both of those boundaries in areas that maybe you didn't realize when you included one of those boundaries.
Your second question, Rhonda, we had this discussion because, yeah, our downtown doesn't have much in it, but the US 31 has generated the most. And so we have like the but-for test of like allocating those funds from the US 31 to districts using downtown, because if it wasn't, if we didn't have an attractive downtown to visit, there would be no reason to, or vice versa.
Yeah, and they will, I mean, that is a very common discussion. Again, if there's an area of your community that's more moving with growth for various reasons, like an interstate, but you want to keep your downtown vibrant, how do you make sure to get some of those TIF monies into downtown and be able to utilize it on projects downtown? But you can always amend the EDA boundaries. Is a pretty easy process to amend, which we'll talk about the process on a later slide. But TIF facade grant improvement programs are a way that you can. So in Indiana, you cannot give TIF to a private individual without some financing mechanism. So said developer can't walk in here and say, "Oh, you guys have some TIF monies in account. Can we have some of them?" That's not, it can't just work that way. And so facade grant improvement program is one of the controlled ways of being able to get TIF monies into the hands of business owners that live in the downtown to fix their facades. And this lawyers definitely have to get pulled into place when you build out these programs because it's pretty strict on getting just the literal facade of the building, not necessarily the roof, which is always a question. And so essentially it allows you, as a redevelopment commission, you could say like per project, like a max amount per project could be this dollar amount. You can only get it this many times per year. You have to do the project and pay for it on your own, and then you get reimbursed. It's typically how it's set up. Some communities are moving towards utilizing LIT for a similar program, which is your income tax. Obviously, there's lots of changes going on there now. So TIF and LIT can all be used kind of simultaneously to fund facade grant improvement programs. So again, one way to basically be able to pay people back for doing work on the buildings. Oftentimes on downtown redevelopment projects, it does take more than just TIF. We call it a capital stack, meaning you might have to use TIF, you might have to also use some tax abatement, there's vacant building deductions that can be used, there might be other city revenues that need to be used. For some historic buildings, there's different tax credits, redevelopment tax credits that can be used. So oftentimes, a complicated downtown building project or renovation project, it is not just the TIF dollars that have to go towards the project to even make it happen. There's typically other funding requirements outside of TIF contribution. These are just 3 example projects that we've worked on throughout the state, and we have a whole long list of projects. But this slide is essentially to show you, like, so for in Jasper, Indiana, they wanted to do a lofts project, a residential lofts project. They had this old Jasper Wood Products building, the city vacant for years, and they wanted to do something with it. So they wanted to turn it into affordable housing for 55 plus. And for this particular project and the developer that they found for it, all of the incentive that was needed from the local government was the tax payment, and that was enough. For the landing project in Fort Wayne, a much larger historic building that they wanted to renovate into a mixed-use development with retail on the first floor, multiple apartments up above. Just a much larger project, so you can see the tools here are much larger as far as they're longer as far as the list goes. It took tax payment, TIF, new tax credits, and also redevelopment tax credits to make that project possible. And then the Pruitt Theater that's in Plainfield, which was a former theater that they renovated, turned it into a restaurant as well. That project was funded through TIF alone. And so every single project is different. Even in your community, every single project is different. What is the need, what's under the ground. I mean, there's so many moving pieces and parts that I would say just keep an open mind with each project that comes to mind when it comes to your table. To get into housing TIF, so residential housing TIF, again, I said came about in 2018 through the legislature. Previously with TIF, the idea was to create jobs and the wages, and not the residential growth would follow. Well, that didn't necessarily happen. So the TIF got the commercial developments to happen, and the housing didn't follow. And so now they're realizing, and really across the country, they're realizing, oh, okay, well, we did a really good job financing like the commercial side of things, and now housing is a major issue in most communities. And so that is really the major reason for the residential housing TIF, and the construction cost to build a home, it just keeps rising. And so the developers have these financial gaps, and they're just like, I'm not going to locate there, I just can't financially make it work. Well, that is where local governments can come in and say, hey, we have housing TIF as an option to help incentivize your project to be that housing development here, because we need homes. And really with housing in general, it's a big discussion. I think it's, there's a lot of planning that goes into housing in your community that I'm not going to get into today, but definitely taking a look and knowing in your community, how many like for rent or apartment type units do you have in your community? How many single family homes that people who, maybe younger families who are in apartments would move into, and then like the middle-aged people, like, maybe they're doing better in their careers, can afford a larger home, so maybe that type of housing, and then you need to see your housing component that they can then transition into when their kids are gone and have their own homes. And so really making sure that you're looking at all of your housing makeup in your community, that you have all of that you can sustain that continued growth, and then just kind of fill as you go. So as a starting point, I would definitely suggest taking a look at what you have as far as housing stuff to make sure that you can fill all of those spots. The housing TIF and commercial TIF are the traditional TIF. The mechanics are the same. So the same drafts that I went through are the same, but you can capture single family homes instead. And you still have the same meeting approvals that we'll get into shortly with RDC, Plan Commission, Council. There's still a tax impact statement and a public hearing required. There's actually 2 public hearings. The life of the TIF area starts when long-term obligation is entered into. And then the 25-year life is a change that was passed in this past legislative session. Historically, TIF areas, right today, if you carry one today, it would be a 20-year life. Well, they're realizing that neighborhoods just take a long time to develop. And so really the tool is more successful like on the back end of the TIF area lives, and so they extended it 5 years. So any TIF, housing TIF area is created by July 1st or thereafter, by July. And that is not retroactive to my knowledge. So if you have created one before, it doesn't have to go back to that. And then the TIF, like commercial TIF, can be pledged towards bonds or leases to finance the incentives. The difference is, I already talked about, that it allows you to capture the single family homes. And then eligible uses of the TIF, I'm going to get into the next slide on slide 20. So residential housing TIF can be used very similarly to commercial TIF. It can be used to pay for that infrastructure or local public improvements in serving or benefiting that housing development. So again, roads, sidewalks, utilities, acquisition of the property, preparation of the property, so if you need to clear the land, do environmental testing, to pay for that. It can pay for any type of financing tool that's needed. And then also can be used to reimburse for projects that were already done. So, similar to commercial TIF, can be used really for pretty much any project. Residential housing TIF also can be used for the same concept of housing development comes in here, but you really need to do park improvements for the kids that are going to be in that neighborhood. That's over here. You can capture the TIF from the housing development, you can do the park project or the trail project or whatever it might be. So you do have to think a little bit bigger picture as far as outside of that development. What are the people who are going to live in that development? What are they going to need? And what does the town maybe need a little bit more of? That's a very common discussion. Circuit breaker tax credits obviously come into play with residential housing TIF. I would say, as you guys all know, with all of the deductions that homeowners get and through SCA 1 and the change in those, that between the deductions and the tax caps, single family homes just don't pay a whole lot of taxes. So for you to generate enough TIF to do the projects that might be needed for a neighborhood, so say the road needed to be done, sidewalks, lighting, signage, stormwater drainage, for you to help pay for all of those projects, it's going to take a pretty good number of homes at a really pretty good sales price to make that TIF worthwhile. And so before any incentives even discussed, you need to run the numbers to make sure you can even get to a number that makes sense. So if you're going to do like 50 homes and they're 200,000, it could potentially not make sense to do that housing TIF because it's not going to generate enough of an incentive to fill in the gaps. But if you're talking a little bit larger homes, a larger number of homes, if you're 200 plus, 250 plus sales price, I mean, it's going to be worthwhile more than likely to do a housing TIF on that project to help finance the project itself or to finance any improvements that you guys would like that. So I just always thought that was a breaker at that point. So with housing TIF, the state did come out with the IFA, the Indiana Finance Authority, did come out with a residential housing infrastructure assistance program. There's 2 slides, lots of information. I'm not going to go over a lot of detail, but essentially it is like a state grant program that you can use. So instead of going to a bank to get money, you could go to the state through their grant program to get money at a very low interest rate to help finance some of these projects. So again, just in the housing TIF discussion, I always want to make mention of this program. It's again, the interest rates are incredibly low compared to where we're at right now. There are some population requirements. The next application round for this is June 15th. Of this year, so that's when they freeze. And they get allotted a certain amount of monies from the state budget each year to fund this program. Yes. Let's see. There's a handful. Jasper, I know just did one. Attica, Indiana, we helped through. And then Attica's example, they have a developer that is, for most TIF, well, for a lot of housing TIF projects, we want the developer to buy the bonds and take the risk for housing projects. And it's essentially a way of the taxes coming in and getting them back to them as an incentive. And so you can still do the RIF loan program even if the developer is buying bonds. So developer, we're like, here are bank interest rates and here is the RIF loan program interest rates. They chose to go through the RIF loan program even though they're still supporting the bonds. So, so they got a loan through this, and then the town decided we're going to help to pledge to them to pay for it. So, I know I have a longer list of that, but those were just two that came to mind. So, I mean, if you can get the developer to just buy the bonds and get the incentive, that's the ideal structure. As you know, housing can be a little bit more risky than commercial development, and so it's just something you always have to keep in mind. To put the risk on the developer and not the town. Any questions with residential housing? Here's a couple of examples of different projects I've worked on. Again, each project is very different in discussion. The first box is the Governor Isaac Gray subdivision that located in Union City, Indiana, which is in Randolph County, north of Richmond. It was 60 custom homes, which was a market that they were missing in their community, and they had a very, very difficult time finding a developer because they were kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so they did end up finding a developer, but because they were having such challenges finding a developer to come build homes there, the city was willing to actually back those bonds themselves with property tax. And so they were payable from the residential housing TIF with the city backup, property tax backup on them. We obviously structure those with very high level of debt service coverage, just again knowing the risk. So they were willing to do that, which is unique. There is Wellfield Community that's in Appanee. This is a mixed housing type, which it was duplex villas, single family homes, and also estate homes. They have some of their estate homes are coming in at like 1.5 million already. And they're talking about phase 2 already as well. So this development was being built out over 6 years. They were able to fund the infrastructure costs that were needed, which was $2.25 million, which is, I would say, a pretty standard number that we see, 2.25 to 2.5, to again do the roads, water, sewer, storm, curbs. And then those were funded through developer purchased EDC economic development funds payable from the TIF. So the developer again took the risk. They bought bonds, they took the risk, and they're going to pay back as their homes construction. And then in Logansport, there was also a brand new subdivision on undeveloped property. The city decided to back those bonds as well. Just the further out you are from the metro, it just gets more and more difficult for communities to find developers. So you guys don't necessarily have that issue here with your proximity to campus, which is good. But I would say in communities such as yours, you just want to make sure that you are controlling the development and the development doesn't happen to you. That you want to make sure that the housing is happening where you prefer it to happen. Any questions with residential housing? I would say also when we do TIF calculations for residential housing TIF, we always do a calculation of the estimated number of students coming into that development too for the school corporation, and do the calculations of what the revenue you guys would get from the estimated number of students coming into that development. So always an important thing for redevelopment commissions and school corporations to work together. So. Some risks to TIF. So say you've done a bond issue, you're counting on that TIF revenue stream to come in to pay those bonds, and you have say 50 parcels, buildings in your TIF area. Say 40 of them were tax exempt for some reason. Some nonprofit came in and bought them. Maybe the city came in and bought them, and all of a sudden that TIF is gone. That is a risk of TIF because the assessment is less than estimated. Maybe a taxpayer comes in and appeals a property, and you no longer get as much TIF. If a company goes out of business, say a tornado happens and comes in and wipes out a building, that happened not too far from here. It's happened in Plainfield too. That Walmart building was in a TIF area, caught on fire. Luckily, they decided to rebuild, so then there wasn't much of a gap of the TIF revenue coming in. But these things do happen, and this is something that whoever is taking the risk on the bond issue needs to be aware of. So we're listening for sure to talk about that. Legislative or regulatory changes, that last comment, definitely an issue, especially on parking developments, which we'll get to. Does TIF take away funds from other units? So you probably have heard the but-for test terminology, and I'm just going to read it. It's in teal at the top. If the increased assessed value from the new development would not occur but for the TIF incentive, then it cannot be lost to the overlapping tax units. So if the development wasn't going to happen, then you guys just wouldn't have anything to nobody. That's the but-for test. TIF does postpone adding that new assessed value to the tax base. So that is a real life thing. But again, you are incentivizing something to come in and locate there or stay there. And then after the TIF area ends, that increased assessed value does get added to the tax base of the tax units, which is the goal of TIF. Does TIF take away funds from schools? Often a question that we get. The schools' educational expenses are largely funded by the state, and it is based on student enrollment. So again, you want to try to get the people here, and you want to try to get the students here, help out the school corporation. Hoping the school corporation wants the students and has space for the new students. The operations fund and the debt service funds are levy limited, so there is no revenue impact from the TIF being captured. TIF capture does postpone reduction in tax rates. And then taxpayers' property tax caps reduce the school funding. So it's not necessarily the TIF, but the circuit breaker is definitely an issue. And then if the school corporation has any referendum approved tax rates, so if they've taken any of their operations running debt to the ballot, and you guys all voted yes and it passed, that portion of the tax rate cannot be captured by the TIF area. So 100% of those revenues go to the school corporation. So Carmel, one of my largest clients, the school corporation loves how many TIF areas the city has, which are really 100 different TIF areas throughout the city. They get like $6 million of revenue because each year because of just the incremental assessed value times their operating referendum rates. So it is truly, it can be a partnership if referendum is something that's being discussed. The bottom right-hand box is how can schools and redevelopment commissions with TIF areas work together? I would say with the SCA 1 changes and the legislative changes this past session, this is more and more of a discussion. It's not so much like schools hate TIF, it's more, okay, revenues are tight for everybody, how can we utilize TIF to help other units of government? And so training programs have been funded for with TIF. Transportation Center in Plainfield was built with TIF for housing school buses and also some of the city vehicles, town's vehicles. STEM programs, safety, security, cameras, for example, computers. If there's personal property coming through, I don't know what it's there, but and if you pass their assessed value, but really it's you get more bang for your buck if you guys figure out how to work together. And if the school corporations can come to the redevelopment commissions and make a proposal of, hey, we have computers we need to replace for the school year, or maybe for the next 3 years, we want to do a replacement program. They do guarantee $25,000 a year for the next 3 years for us to replace the computers. That is a real life example, and it just ways that you guys can work together. Obviously, it does take a successful TIF areas to generate revenue to have those discussions, but definitely worth the discussion. You can utilize up to 15% of TIF revenues generated in an allocation area for job training programs. So local school corporations or nonprofits, or if you have any higher ed institutions, you can use 15% of those annual revenues for TIF or job training programs. And then utilizing TIF for school capital projects indirectly or benefiting the TIF areas. And it does have to be in economic development. So a few examples here of other communities where redevelopment commissions and school corporations have worked together. As I mentioned, Plainfield and their transportation center, we should TIF bonds to build that structure. In Whitley County, the county RDC contributed $7.5 million to the school corporation to fund school building improvements. They have a very successful TIF area up there. In Ligonier, we helped fund a child care center that was actually inside the West Nova School Corporation building, the Little Zebras program. That program is actually popping out to a new building, and so we're having another TIF discussion there. It's been very successful and it's growing. In Lebanon, they used TIF to fund a multi-use training room in the high school. So just a few examples of how TIF can help. As far as establishing or amending a TIF area, these are the steps on slide 30. So first, you obviously need to identify the boundaries and what parcels you want in each one of the boundaries. And then it's essentially 4 meetings. It starts with the redevelopment commission, then it goes to the planning commission, and then city or town council, and then back to the redevelopment commission for a public hearing. If you are creating a residential housing TIF on the front end, after the first RDC meeting, you have to have a second public hearing. That has to be in and around where the housing development is going to be located. So typically, I would say town hall city develops within the proximity. You have to have a second public hearing. You have to invite surrounding neighborhood associations, and there's a long list of folks that have to be invited to that meeting. So that is this meeting, or the creation. If you want to amend your TIF area, the same process. Step number 5 is that you have to publish notice of that public hearing, and you also have to send out a tax impact statement to the overlapping tax units that are where the TIF area is going to be located. So all of the overlapping tax units are notified. And that's great. And then generate it. This just says that you can amend, create, reestablish TIF areas, and then on the right-hand side, it says again that traditional or commercial TIF has a 25-year life, and then the residential housing TIF areas have a 25-year life as well. When you have TIF areas in place, there are of course state reporting requirements that come along with having a TIF area. So it is an expense to the redevelopment commissions that have TIF areas in place, and right now there are 5 state reporting requirements throughout the year if you have even one TIF area. And so I'm going to hop down to the April 15th. By April 15th of each year, a TIF management report has to be filed, which was just done. That reports on prior year activity of the redevelopment commission for each one of its TIF areas. That report has when the TIF areas were created, when they were matured, total revenues, total expenditures, a detail of the expenditures for the year. Debt outstanding has debt information in it. And then it's also presented at the council as well. The next requirement coming up is the June 15th pass-through letters, which we just sent around last week. Those have to be sent out to all of the overlapping taxing units, basically saying if the redevelopment commission is going to pass through assessed value, incremental assessed value to the overlapping taxing units. Basically, like, one time a year, redevelopment commissions can make a determination if they want to pass through assessed value to the overlapping taxing units. There are not many units that have TIF areas that pass through assessed value. Again, the various older, successful, like the Plainfields of the world, all of those industries, they are able to pass through like 100 million of assessed value because they generate so much incremental assessed value. Again, very one-off cases where that can happen. The legislature put into place this year, that last bullet point, under June 15th, is that if a redevelopment commission fails to provide the pass-through letters, that the county auditor can automatically pass through 5% of the incremental assessed value. So that was just something new that was added. We're gonna make sure that doesn't happen. After June 15th, is the TIF neutralization process that got moved up, having to be done by July 15th of this year. Again, one time a year, the base assessed value, that gray bar, is adjusted up or down by a factor that is calculated called the neutralization factor. And that base value is adjusting up or down based on how assessed values are trending in the county. And so if all AVs in the county are going up by a certain percentage, that base value should also go up by that same percentage so that everybody's getting their pro rata share of what it should be. So the TIF should not benefit from general AV increases throughout the county. So they'll get some of it, but the base will also get some of it as well. And then fourth requirement is the December 1st TIF spending plan. And that essentially is how the redevelopment commission is going to spend its TIF money in the next calendar year. So that is something that also has to be submitted to the DOTF. And then the fifth requirement is the annual meeting presentation. So one time a year, you guys are all invited here to talk about the TIF areas of Edinburgh. And you have to talk about the budget, the long-term plan, and the impact on each one of the overlapping tax units. So there are lots of opportunities for you to access public data and where all of this stuff is going on Gateway, and also come in person to that meeting. That is not their covered. And that goes with every redevelopment commission. So lots of reporting requirements currently. I just wanted to provide some factual information. There's so much data out there on TIF areas, but I wanted to show you on the left-hand side some of the communities that are in Johnson County. And oops. The numbers got changed. You guys have like 12 areas. Oh, Barnesville as well. Sorry.
Where?
Yeah. My bad. Barnesville does have 12 TIF areas. Edinburgh has 4, Franklin has 17, Greenwood has 14, Johnson County has 2, and Trafalgar has 3. So just pieces of information. There are over 1,500 TIF areas throughout the whole state of Indiana. So just some fun facts. And then what I did on the right-hand side was just communities with similar populations to you guys. I would say that is not a driving factor for how many TIF areas you should have. I just thought it was kind of interesting to see of similar populations how many TIF areas folks have. So you can see there, Austin, South Pier has 4, Indiana has 4, Richville has 10, Salem has 6, and Winchester has 6. So just some fun facts. All this information is available on Gateway. So any questions with TIF? I did include a few slides on the legislative changes. I was just going to see if we had time to go through it. If not, I can also get in, but I think this is good. We can hit on it really high level, but does anybody have questions, thoughts with TIF?
Who learned something about TIF today?
Everybody learns something. Good. I think multiple people are like, I can hear this 10 times and I still learn something new, one little piece of fun fact, so. Well, it is used all over the state of Indiana, and again, population is definitely not the driver of the size. Some communities have really large areas too, so they may have one, but it's huge. Definitely not my strategy suggestion to you guys, but, okay, legislative impacts. So for SEA, SEA 1 and also HEA 1427 that was passed this year, the main overall changes are listed in this slide. So for property taxes, there was an increase in automatic deductions to different property classifications through 2031, which I'll show you on our next slides. There was an increase to property tax credits on the homestead property side of things. They eliminated certain property tax deductions. On personal property, they have increased the de minimis calculation, which we'll get into, and on the 30% floor, it's gone. And then the ag base rate changed. They eliminated the property tax replacement credit. The maximum levy growth quotient is not limited, as we talked about earlier. And then the local income tax structure is significantly changing. So I'm gonna talk about these things in a little bit more detail, in case you have not heard or sat through one of our presentations on legislative changes. So this slide is for homestead properties. So if you own a home in Indiana, this applies to you. So the top line item is the standard deduction. That is a fixed deduction dollar amount. That is going away by 2031 down to zero. So you can see it incrementally decreasing from now until 2031 to zero. That fixed dollar amount deduction. The supplemental homestead deduction is a percentage though, and that is increasing out to 2031. So by 2031, if you have a home, you take your gross assessed value, your land plus your building value, and you subtract 66.7% of that assessed value. You're welcome. It's just free. It's just going to happen if you have a homestead file. That will reduce the net assessed value of your property. That is what you pay your taxes on. And then the supplemental homestead credit is on the credit side of things. So the deductions are on the assessed value. And then you take a times the tax rate divided by 100, you get to the tax dollar side of things. Then you get an automatic, either the lesser of $300 subtracted off your tax bill, or 10% of your net tax bill, whatever the lesser is. So if you say you're over it, you get an automatic $300 just removed from the tax bill.
That makes it to where technically you can never meet your circuit breaker tax. After the circuit breaker. So you're always gonna have your circuit breaker max, the 1% of your property you can pay, and then you're gonna have that 3% or 10% over $300 off, which is gonna drop you lower.
Lower than what the tax cap would have come to. And then there are several other credits if you're over 65 or disabled homeowner. There are other additional credits, which again are, you get to your tax bill and then subtract from your tax bill. What all of that means for local government officials is potentially less dollars in the door. One thing that is out of all of this control is assessed values and what is happening with assessed values. Assessed values are an equation of state factors that they provide to the county, and then county local factors that they implement to the assessed values. Well, what happened last year to every county in the state of Indiana is that the state changed the cost tables with how to come up with assessments. So everybody's assessed value, which is that gross, that very top line, that gross AV, your land plus your building, all went way up because the state changed the cost tables. And so that change could potentially increase your tax bill because your assessed value you're calculating off, everything off of, increased. So if you saw that, that is not due to SCA one change, that's due to something totally separate in the side, that is something the state changed at the assessed value level. So I've been getting that question a lot, so I thought I would clarify that. So that's homestead property tax changes. On slide 37, I just did the calculation for you. So you can see kind of bottom line, what happens to, on a singular property, what happens to your net assessed value. And so you can see that over time that does decrease. On 2% assessed value properties, 2% tax cap properties, if you own apartment development, this is lovely for you. By 2031, you will get to take your gross assessed value times 33.4% and deduct that from your net assessed value that you're paying taxes on. It's essentially a free payment. It's going to be automatically in place. And so, again, this is a reduction of your net assessed value. That is a reduction of your tax basis that you have to get your levy based on. So, if your AVs are going down because of these new deductions, your tax rate will come up to get you to that levy, tax maximum levy growth portion. On personal property is the equipment within buildings. So if you have large industries, this could affect you, your community. Two things, de minimis exemption. So if you own a business that has equipment within it that you are currently paying taxes on, if you have this year 80,000 of replacement value or less of equipment, you are not paying any taxes on that. That de minimis is increasing to 2 million. So if you have 2 million of replacement value equipment in your business or less, you'll no longer pay taxes on it. So that again is like no taxes that will be coming to local government from 2 million less. So again, kind of think through like the businesses in the community, kind of where their valuation of their personal property is at, just understand that effect too.
That affects smaller communities, I feel like more because most of the personal property within that community is under that.
Small businesses, you own a restaurant, you have some small, like 2 million or less in equipment, now you won't pay any taxes on it. Good for the business owner, not great for the local government. And then the last line item there is that it removes the 30% floor for equipment placement service. So this is complicated fast, but say under big industries, the big machinery within a building, that they all pay taxes on that. So on 103 form, which is a tax form where you're doing your calculation of taxes for the big equipment, historically, the depreciation column there would depreciate down, but once you hit 30% floor, then that's what that level of assessed value is what you would pay your taxes on. Well, that 30% floor is going away, which means your equipment can depreciate lower than 30%. They will still pay taxes, but it will be maybe 10% or 15% or 5% based on whatever pool of equipment they're in. So they will still be paying taxes, it'll just be on the lower amount. Another great thing for business owners, not great thing for local governments, because that's just taxes they're not paying. So again, understanding the makeup of personal property that hits your budgets is very important. On local income tax, there's a major shift from property tax to local income tax. It got first brought up in SCA 1 in 2025. 2026, this past session, there were changes that are listed out here. One, if you guys don't know what the change happened, is essentially that municipalities of a certain size can implement their own income tax rate, and if they are 35,000 populations or below, they automatically go into the county. But if you are above 3,500, then you can implement your own lit rate. And so that adoption got delayed to 2028 instead of 2027 to get away from an election year. So then first collection would be received in 2029. But essentially what that will require is all units of government to decide whether or not they're gonna implement their own lit rate or income tax rate, or if they are going to join the county. So the municipal county-wide lit rate in the second column here allows municipalities to opt into a county-wide municipal services rate. And it caps the distribution of each municipality at 150% of the population. So essentially for you guys are above 3,500, you will have the opportunity to implement your own lit rate. You will need to decide if it makes sense to have your own lit rate or if you should join the county. And then what the pros and cons of those things are.
To that, Heidi, one thing that comes into play in Edinburgh is Street County, the three of the counties. I don't think it directly says in the statute, but our interpretation is that you only implement lit in the county where the population is over 3,500. So for Edinburgh County, Johnson County, they can adopt their own lit because they're over 3,500 population. For the other two, like on the Shelby, they have to rely on whatever the county decides to adopt from that county-wide municipal area. They could still opt in Johnson County. And from our preliminary lit analysis, that looks like depending on the rate that may be beneficial to the county, because that should seem to be any information that's come out, that is going to be a huge difference.
So there's lots of work to be done. The lit readoption, the first time it gets adopted, it carries for 3 years, and then it has to be annually adopted thereafter. That can become an issue for local governments who try to finance projects with income tax as the source of revenue, because it becomes a question to the person who's buying those bonds. Oh, well, if the town just decides to get rid of it, therefore, how am I guaranteed that revenue rate? So lots of questions and conversations about that. Fire and EMS lit is a whole separate conversation, so I'm gonna keep rolling. This slide just lays out the new lit structure between the county services on the left-hand side, the fire and EMS in its own column, the non-municipal units, which would be those portions in Bartholomew and Shelby for you guys, and then municipal services countywide rate, and then the municipal services rate. So depending upon where you fall, so obviously you guys are not in the county, but like the municipal services rate on the far right-hand side, if you decide in your Johnson County portion of the town that you want to implement your own rate, the max rate is 1.2%, and then you have to do the calculations of how much revenue that is, and that's something that has been done, is being looked at. So just again wanted to provide this information to you so you have it, just in case you haven't seen it before. What I would say is there are several communities that are not going to be made whole, meaning they're not going to receive the lit revenues they're receiving now because of some of these changes. And so the counties are going to benefit more, so it's just like how do you work together? Again, as overlapping units, inclusive of the county and those discussions.
And then it stood out because the AIM lit report that was put out, Edinburgh was the very top of the list of the most effective redundant 66% of local income tax if they adopted the 1.2 max. So it was $1.5 million. Now those are from AIM and the numbers may not be 100% accurate, but I don't think they're inaccurate. I think it's going to be a huge step. But we're providing that analysis.
So where TIF and this all come together and get married is you need people to live in town so that you can get the income tax generated from the people who live in the town. Right now, you guys are, the AIM estimates is that the town's getting hit so hard because right now, the lit that the town is getting is from everyone in the whole county, which means more people live out in the county that are generating the income tax to pay you guys. If you do the analysis looking just at the town, it just means there are fewer people who live in the town tax that the town is getting from. So with that, you will have and you will see competition amongst communities to try to get the housing developments in their town. And they're going to annex more because they need those developments in their town to have more people to get more income tax. And the same goes with business, and you want everything to be within the town. And so if you are not thinking now ahead of, okay, what do we want to become, where do we want to grow, what revenues are we going to be losing, and getting ahead of that, then you will fall behind. So that's why these discussions are so helpful, to get the discussion of this development, economic development, what are we going to become, how do we get strategic in the whole income tax discussion is so critical.
And another clarification, the town is going to be losing out on these dollars, not just because the town has a lower AGI than some of these other communities and because they have a lower population. Part of it is because we're benefiting so greatly from the previous lip structure, because they have a much higher levy than some other units of Johnson County that has the population. So like rewriting, for example, the rent that they get is, I want to say it's like half of what the town benefit gets. Even though their population's higher, the AGI is probably a little higher, but because the old legislation was based on the amount of levy, Edinburgh benefits more than some of the other units.
This slide is on the municipal unit strategic tax force. It's called MUST. Hopefully you guys have seen the articles that we've been rolling out about this, but essentially if you guys as a town decide to join into the county-wide municipal lit rate, then you will have to be a part of what is called MUST. And each county by October 1st must convene as a must, which you need to be way before October 1st. And the must is a makeup of one representative from the county council, as well as each city and town fiscal officer within the county. And it may not include representatives of fire protection and EMS, nor representatives of non-municipal civil tax units. The primary responsibility is to negotiate and establish through unanimous support how the lift distribution is going to happen. And so basically it just forces all the fiscal officers of the county and all of the units to get together to figure out what lit rate you're going to put in place and how you're going to share it. And
one other clarification on that is, I would say whether or not you're going to be part of the county-wide, be a part of the MUST task force. And I know Ron was already heard from Shelby County. Another issue with Edinburgh is we're going to have three different MUST communities that are not to be a part of. But regardless of whether you continue in that county-wide or whether you're going to adopt your own, get together, because it will be a discussion, and then maybe you can understand better if you go to Shelby County, 100% Shelbyville is going to adopt their own lit. That makes the scenarios that we're creating easier to come about. Right now, there are so many different scenarios that you can put in place for Edinburgh, because there are so many communities that are over 3,500 in 3 counties that can't adopt their own lit. And at this point, nobody knows which units will do that. So being a part of these MUST will help understand whose AGI we can pull out, which may benefit the town more because then all of a sudden we're getting a bigger piece of that pie. But be a part of this, even though it's optional, be a part of it. Encourage everyone to come, not just fiscal officers.
yeah, it's a public meeting, so
Yes,
go.
yes, go to the meeting, understand it. And I know it's going to be a big time for everywhere, with 3 different, hopefully all of the counties.
And then the county, each one of the counties is, or all of the counties are required to send an agreement to the DLGF, who will then compile a report of all submitted lit distribution agreements and then submit to like the state legislative council by December 1st of this year. So basically the legislatures can decide or see who's deciding to go which route.
Not like, it's not a binding report.
So anyways, there's definitely a lot of work that needs to happen between now and October 1st on lit, and you just need to make sure that's supported. Yeah. So I know that's so much information at once, but want to see if anybody has Any questions? My contact information is on your slide, so if you have any questions following this, don't hesitate to reach out. I want to be a resource to all of you. Yes.
I have a question. Which TIF district would be more important for Edinburgh, would it be the residential or the commercial business? And when you look at the homestead property tax assessment deduction credits, are all going to get cut. Because if you look here at the net assessment of $120,446 and it drops to the $80,168, that's getting back. Meaning is,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of both. Like, what do you need here? And it's probably one of the things is going to be a mix. You need probably some businesses, and you have some home opportunities coming or happening in bits now. That's it. Yeah, segregation should definitely have been a tip, so that you can use those funds to do projects and serving a visiting there or extending EDA in different areas of the town to bring in different entities.
And I think,
2018 is when it started.
Around, it wasn't. It wasn't very good.
Is there a phase 2 on it that hasn't started?
it's already started.
Phase 2, yeah. So normally, once the shovel's in the ground, they'll, like legal counsel will tell you can't start going because you won't meet the but-for test. But you can still have a TIF area and not meet the but-for test. Just all of the overlapping taxing units have to understand why you're doing it. But
And I think why this is so important for all of us to understand is in order to extract housing and development, we have to invest in quality of life. Just building houses is not going to attract people here if there's nothing to do or keep them here. And the school won't benefit, the industry won't benefit because they won't have employees. Downtown needs revitalized. People want to come to a ugly, vacant ghost town. Kathy literally had someone come in the community center recently and said, "Is this like a ghost town?" So it all is important. Yeah.
So any projects that are working on currently, bring people in, construction. Push to spend some of that money that are captured. Maybe that's some kind of move.
And we need diverse housing. I mean, we're losing a lot of our older population because there's no place for them to live here. Our 55 plus, we're losing those folks because we don't have adequate housing for them. And so we need tools like this to incentivize Newberry Point to build on the land that they own east of them. However, even that is a tricky situation right now with the ownership. They're going to be the rent is probably going to be increasing over there because of the tax incentives that they were using. They're not going to reinstate, and so those could become a lot higher dollar that we could be losing more of that population.
And I would say, we've often worked with communities. Okay, let's identify sites. What do you want there and connect. 100%. We're working with developers all over the state, wherever we can help connect. And not that they're going to buy it, but at least like to make a case, get in front of some developers and do the best we can. And if the schools are at the table, it always helps. So it's again working together to understand your own vision and what you want your goals to be, and helping execute it. So it starts here. This is the discussion, very basic discussion, but if you're all willing and open, then
So I know we talked a little bit about this, but we have an area north of town that has been platted for housing. I guess we really need to look, does that make sense for us to put that in a residential tip now? What will that look like for, the long term for the school? I mean, to attract families. We also, in order to attract industry, we have to have places for them to live. So if we want our workforce to increase, we have to increase the housing opportunity. But it sounds like there are times where putting that in a tip isn't attractive just because the developer is already willing to come in and do it, but it's, for us, it's the infrastructure, and that's where the developers, what we're hearing is the infrastructure cost, and that's something the town can do with utilizing TIF funds to incentivize them.
Yeah, I mean, if a two things. If a developer is willing to come in and do development here, you can still tip it because you have trail needs or downtown improvements or whatever other needs to help meet the buffer test. And you can straight face say you need to do these other things.
Yeah. It's the school, the library, they're also gonna benefit.
100%. So that's example one. Example two, if you have a developer and there is a financial gap, then yes, you can use the TIF revenue off of their project only to incentivize them. You don't have to use other TIF areas. You just the new housing development, for example, just incentivize them. And if the TIF is more than what is needed just to incentivize them, don't give them any more. Like just give them what they need. And then use the other TIF monies again for other projects that you have done. And maybe it is you need an industrial park or something else, like you can help get site like shovel ready and still meet the buffer test because you know, so that's just some creative discussions. So it's really good that everybody kind of have their eye and ear on the ground as far as, you know, what developments are being discussed out there. I think again, I'm a firm believer that it's best if you all are the ones driving the development and deciding where you want things instead of development just happening to you. If you can do that through all the zoning and different approvals and policies and so in place. It might seem it's going to be done. Any other questions, thoughts? I appreciate all the head nods and you guys are staying with me and seeing. I know it's a lot again at once, but I appreciate you guys being here and taking the morning. Let us know if I can get anything. Thank you for having me.
I need to close the meeting.
Oh yeah, close the meeting.
For the Economic Development Commission, we need a motion to adjourn. Second.
I'll send it.
Adjourn.
The school board, meeting will be adjourned.
Second.
Second.